In November 1991, one factory in Springfield, Missouri, employed 1,500 workers building television sets for American homes. This wasn't just any factory. This was the last factory. By then, every other American television manufacturer had surrendered to foreign competition or collapsed entirely. RCA, gone, sold to Thomson of France. Magnavox, bought by Philips. Motorola, exited the TV business completely. Admiral, Philco, Sylvania, all dead or absorbed into foreign conglomerates. Only Zenith remained, still assembling televisions on American soil, still employing American workers, still fighting. Walk into that sprawling 123-acre complex on East Kearny Street, and you'd see assembly lines stretching across 2 million square feet of factory floor. Workers in safety glasses installing circuit boards into wooden cabinets. Quality control stations where technicians tested every set before it left the building. The company's slogan painted on the wall in letters 6 feet high. The quality goes in before the name goes on. This factory had produced over 1 million color televisions. At its peak, it employed 6,000 people. For Springfield, a city of 120,000 souls, Zenith wasn't just an employer, it was the economy. They had built America's first portable radio. They had invented the wireless television remote control, the clicker that changed how humans watch TV. They had pioneered high-definition television technology that would become the American broadcast standard. For 73 years, Zenith had stood for American innovation, American manufacturing, American quality. Then, something went catastrophically wrong. On October 29, 1991, Zenith announced it was moving television assembly to Mexico. The Springfield factory would be gutted, 1,200 jobs eliminated. Within 2 years, the assembly lines fell silent. By 1998, Zenith closed its last American manufacturing facility, a picture tube plant outside Chicago. And in 1999, the company filed for bankruptcy and was absorbed completely by LG Electronics of South Korea. The workers scattered, the factory was sold, and America stopped making televisions. Not gradually, not with some orderly transition to new industries, just stopped. The last factory closed, and American television manufacturing ended forever. This is the story of how 2 ham radio operators turned a kitchen table startup into one of America's greatest electronics empires. How innovation and relentless quality obsession created a company that seemed indestructible, and how that same company made a series of decisions so desperate and short-sighted that it imploded while winning the very technology battle it had bet everything on. This is about the fatal cost of refusing to adapt, about selling your profitable businesses to fund your dying ones, about wearing last standing as a badge of honor when it's actually a death sentence. This isn't just about old television sets gathering dust in your parents' basement. This is about what happens when an entire American industry disappears. When 81 years of engineering excellence, billions in investment, and thousands of workers' livelihoods get reduced to a brand name stamped on cheap TVS built overseas. When being right about the future doesn't matter because you didn't survive long enough to see it. Welcome inside the forgotten Zenith factory, where America's television empire was built, dominated, and destroyed. Chicago, 1918. A 2-car garage in Edgewater, Illinois, on the city's north side. Inside that cramped space, 2 young men hunched over a kitchen table covered in radio equipment. Carl Hassel was 22, a Pennsylvania native who'd moved to Chicago chasing the radio boom. Ralph Matthews was 21, a local Chicagoan with a technical mind and steady hands. They were ham radio operators, hobbyists who built their own equipment and broadcast on amateur frequencies. The war in Europe had just ended. Soldiers were flooding home. And radio, which had proven its worth coordinating military communications, was about to explode into the consumer market. Hassel and Matthews saw the opportunity. They called their operation the Chicago Radio Laboratory, and they started building radio equipment for other amateurs. Not radios for listening. Those would come later. Equipment for transmitting, tuners, amplifiers, components that serious hobbyists needed but couldn't find anywhere else. They sold under the brand name Zenith, taken from the call letters of Hassel's amateur station, 9ZN. The business grew faster than they expected. Orders piled up. The kitchen table became insufficient. They expanded into the garage proper, then rented additional space. By 1920, they had a real operation. Employees, inventory, an order book that stretched months ahead. The problem was capital. Every dollar went into materials and wages. They couldn't expand production fast enough to meet demand, and they couldn't afford the equipment they needed to scale up. They had the talent. They had the market. What they didn't have was money. That problem was about to be solved by a man who would define Zenith for the next 4 decades. A man who dropped out of high school to work in a factory, who'd driven a car up the steps of a Chicago monument as a publicity stunt, who'd earned the rank of lieutenant commander in the Navy and insisted everyone call him Commander for the rest of his life. A man who understood that selling radios wasn't about circuits and frequencies. It was about theater, adventure, and making people believe they were buying a piece of the future. In 1921, Eugene F. McDonald Jr. walked into that garage. He saw 2 talented engineers drowning in orders they couldn't fill. He saw a business that could dominate if it had proper financing and marketing. And he saw an opportunity to build something that mattered. McDonald brought capital. He brought connections. And most importantly, he brought a vision of what Zenith could become. Not just another radio manufacturer grinding out units, an American electronics empire. By 1923, the transformation was complete. Chicago Radio Laboratory became Zenith Radio Corporation. 30,000 shares issued at $10 each. McDonald took the largest block. The garage was history. They moved into a real factory. And the name, McDonald insisted on proper branding, became simply Zenith, complete with a lightning bolt trademark that would become one of the most recognized symbols in American electronics. From a kitchen table to a corporation in 5 years. The foundation was set. But empires aren't built on foundation alone. They're built on innovation, marketing genius, and an almost fanatical obsession with quality. McDonald was about to show them how it was done. Eugene F. McDonald Jr. was born March 11, 1886, in Syracuse, New York, into a family that had no particular wealth or connections. His father worked as a mechanic. By the time Eugene reached high school, formals, education bored him. He lasted until his sophomore year, then walked out to take a factory job with the Franklin Automobile Company. He was 16 years old and done with classrooms forever. School didn't appeal to McDonald, but selling did. In 1904, he moved to Chicago and became an automobile salesman for Franklin. He had a gift for promotion, for making noise, for getting attention. One of his stunts became legendary. He drove a car up the steps of the General John Logan Memorial in Grant Park. A photographer was positioned to capture the moment. A policeman was standing by to arrest him. McDonald had paid the cop $10 in advance. The arrest made the papers. The publicity worked. That was McDonald, always thinking 3 moves ahead, always understanding that perception mattered as much as product. When World War I erupted, McDonald joined the Navy and earned the rank of lieutenant commander. After the war, he insisted everyone address him as the commander for the rest of his life. He'd earned the title, and he wore it like armor. It conveyed authority, leadership, a connection to service and sacrifice. It was brilliant branding before anyone called it branding. In 1921, McDonald entered into partnership with Hassel and Matthews. He was appointed general manager. The arrangement was simple. They brought technical expertise and manufacturing capability. He brought money and marketing vision. Within 2 years, the partnership had grown substantial enough to incorporate. In 1923, Zenith Radio Corporation was officially born. 30,000 shares at $10 per share. McDonald's secured the largest single block. The garage days were over, but McDonald wasn't satisfied building radios in a factory and shipping them to stores. He understood that Zenith needed stories, adventures, proof that its equipment could perform under conditions that would destroy competitors. In 1923, he persuaded Admiral Donald B. McMillan to take Zenith shortwave radios on his Arctic expedition. McMillan's transmissions from the frozen north, clear, powerful, reaching thousands of miles, proved shortwave communication worked. More importantly, they proved Zenith worked. The publicity was invaluable. 2 years later, McDonald went further. He helped organize another McMillan expedition, this time to the North Pole. McDonald joined as a ship commander, but only traveled as far as Greenland. From there, he broadcast shortwave transmissions of Eskimos singing into the microphone. The broadcasts were heard across America. Zenith's advertising reminded everyone. When explorers needed radios in the most hostile environment on Earth, they chose Zenith, not RCA, not Westinghouse. Zenith. This wasn't just marketing, it was mythology building. McDonald was creating an image of Zenith as the radio for serious people doing serious things. Adventurers, explorers, the military. If Zenith could work in the Arctic, it could work in your living room. The quality goes in before the name goes on. That slogan, borrowed from a Chicago piano maker and introduced by Zenith in 1927, became the company's core identity. McDonald meant it. He invested relentlessly in research and development, in engineering talent, in manufacturing precision. The radios had to be excellent because the reputation depended on it. In 1923, McDonald also became the first president of the National Association of Broadcasters. He was expanding the radio medium itself, pushing for better standards, more stations, clearer regulations. He wasn't just building a company, he was building an industry. By 1927, Zenith was large enough to secure its own RCA manufacturing license, breaking free from dependence on competitors. The company was legitimate now, a real industrial player with factories, employees, distribution networks, and a reputation for quality that was becoming unshakable. McDonald's vision was working. The ham radio startup was evolving into something far bigger. Then came the catastrophe that should have destroyed them. Instead, it revealed exactly what Zenith was made of. The stock market crashed in October 1929, and the radio industry collapsed with it. Zenith's sales plummeted from $10 million in 1929 to less than $2 million in 1932. 5 consecutive years of losses. Factories went quiet. Competitors folded. The entire consumer electronics industry was dying. Most companies borrowed heavily, mortgaged their assets, and still went bankrupt. Zenith survived without taking on debt. The credit goes to Hugh Robertson, the company treasurer who joined in 1923. Robertson's financial discipline and careful planning kept Zenith solvent through the Depression, when flashier competitors drowned in red ink. But here's what separated Zenith from everyone else. McDonald never stopped investing in research and development. While competitors slashed engineering budgets and laid off talent, Zenith kept building better radios. In 1934, with the Depression still crushing America, McDonald sent telegrams to every oil and tire company in the country. The message was simple: watch how empty the streets are during presidential radio addresses, then get rich selling Zenith auto radios. It worked. By 1936, net sales hit $8.5 million, with $1.2 million in profit. A year later, sales nearly doubled to $17 million, with almost $2 million in profit. Zenith wasn't just surviving the Depression, it was positioning itself to dominate when the economy recovered. Then came World War II, and everything changed again. Zenith shifted to war production. radar systems, communications equipment, high-sensitivity frequency meters. The kind of precision electronics the military needed and few companies could build. Net sales jumped to $23.8 million in 1941, then $34.2 million in 1942, with $1.4 million in net income. The war effort kept the factories running and the engineering teams sharp. And when the war ended, Zenith was ready for the next revolution: television. The first Zenith television set appeared in 1939, experimental and expensive. Commercial sets reached consumers in 1948, just as Americans were hungry for new technology and had money to spend. But Zenith didn't just build televisions. They invented the modern way of watching them. In 1950, they introduced Lazy Bones, the first television remote control. It had a wire, which people hated. Nobody wanted a cable running across their living room from the couch to the TV. So McDonald ordered his engineers to develop a wireless version. Eugene Pauly created the Flashmatic in 1955, using a directional photo flash tube aimed at sensors on the TV. Brilliant in theory, disastrous in practice. Bright sunlight would accidentally change channels. Then, Robert Adler suggested ultrasonic sound waves, small aluminum rods in the remote that made different high-pitched tones when struck. The TV listened for those specific frequencies and responded. Pressing the buttons made an audible clicking sound, which is why people started calling remotes clickers. The Space Command ultrasonic remote launched in 1956, and it transformed television. Zenith claimed it increased TV sales by 40%. Let that number sink in. 40%. One innovation, letting people change channels without getting off the couch, boosted an entire product line by nearly half. Zenith licensed the technology to RCA and others, then successfully sued Admiral twice for patent violations. The remote control wasn't just a gadget. It was a fundamental shift in how humans interacted with technology, and Zenith owned it. By 1960, Zenith stood alongside RCA as one of the two largest television manufacturers in America. Each company controlled more than 20% of the market. 25 other companies split the remaining 60%. Think about that for a second. Two giants with 40% of the market between them, and everyone else fighting for scraps. Zenith employed 11,000 people by 1962, with at least 6,460 working in 7 Chicago plants. The corporate headquarters sat at 6001 West Dickens Avenue, where 2,500 workers built radios, televisions, and hi-fi stereo phonographs. Additional plants manufactured government electronics, TV components, transistors, hearing aids. The company introduced color televisions in 1961, and in 1969 unveiled the Chromacolor picture tube, a breakthrough in brightness and color accuracy. Through most of the 1970s, Consumer Reports rated Zenith among the highest quality television manufacturers in America. The company avoided printed circuit boards and vacuum tube equipment because heat could break down the boards over time. Instead, Zenith hand-wired their chassis, more expensive, more labor-intensive, but more durable. Zenith televisions from the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s still work today, decades after cheaper competitors turned to electronic waste. This was the golden age. Zenith and RCA ruled American television together. Between them, they controlled nearly half the market. Quality, innovation, American manufacturing, it all seemed unshakable. Workers clocked in at Chicago factories every morning, knowing they were building products that would last 20 years. Engineers developed new technologies that pushed the industry forward. Management believed in the slogan painted on every factory wall: "The quality goes in before the name goes on." This is the moment when everything worked. The market was growing. The products were excellent. The competition was manageable. Zenith had survived the Depression and the war and emerged stronger. They'd invented the wireless remote. They were about to dominate color television. Nothing could stop them. And it will never be this good again. November 20th, 1967. Springfield, Missouri. Zenith opened its newest manufacturing facility on 123 acres at 2500 East Kearny Street. The investment was $10 million, equivalent to well over $90 million today. The complex sprawled across 2 million square feet of factory floor. This wasn't just another plant. This was a statement. While competitors were already eyeing offshore manufacturing, Zenith was doubling down on American production. The decision to build in Springfield was calculated. Zenith executives studied the labor market within a 40 to 50 mile radius and found the supply adequate and more desirable than competing locations. The city's vocational technical school produced trained workers. The Midwest work ethic was legendary. Labor costs were lower than Chicago, but the quality was just as high. Springfield needed the jobs, and Zenith needed the capacity. It seemed like perfect alignment. 2 years after opening, on October 23, 1969, the Springfield factory produced its 1 millionth color television set. Think about that for a second. 1 million televisions in 2 years from a single facility. The assembly lines never stopped. Workers clocked in for 3 shifts around the clock. Cabinets were injection molded in the plastics operation, painted in 2 separate spray facilities, then moved to assembly, where circuit boards and cathode ray tubes manufactured elsewhere were installed. Every television was tested before it left the building. The quality control standards were brutal. If a set didn't meet specifications, it didn't ship. At peak capacity, the Springfield factory employed 6,000 workers. In a city of 120,000 people, that meant 1 in every 20 residents worked for Zenith. Entire families worked there. Fathers, sons, daughters. Some families had 3 generations on the same assembly line. The wages were solid middle class. Benefits were good. Stability was real. For Springfield, Zenith wasn't just an employer. It was the foundation of the local economy. Walk through that factory in the early 1970s, and you'd see something rare in American manufacturing: hand-wired television chassis. While competitors had switched to printed circuit boards, faster, cheaper, easier, Zenith stubbornly stuck with hand wiring for vacuum tube equipment. The reason was simple. Circuit boards couldn't handle the heat generated by vacuum tubes. Over time, the boards would break down, crack, fail. Hand wiring cost more. It took longer, but it lasted. Zenith televisions from the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s still work today because of that decision. Competitor sets became landfill decades ago. The company finally introduced circuit boards with the Chromacolor line in the early 1970s, but only for solid-state components. The 4 tubes in the Chromacolor 4-tube hybrid were still mounted on steel chassis. Even Zenith's early transistor radios were completely hand-wired with socketed transistors. The engineering philosophy was consistent: build it right, build it to last, charge what it costs. Consumer Reports consistently rated Zenith among the highest quality television manufacturers through most of the 1970s. The slogan wasn't marketing fluff. The quality goes in before the name goes on was company doctrine. McDonald had drilled it into the culture before his death in 1958, and it survived him. Engineers took pride in over-engineering everything. Assembly line workers knew they were building televisions that would outlast cheaper competitors. Management believed premium quality justified premium prices. The innovations kept coming. In 1969, the Chromacolor picture tube increased brightness and improved color accuracy. The System 3 chassis launched in the late 1970s, incorporating advanced features like the Space Phone, a hands-free speakerphone built into the television that connected to a telephone jack. You could answer calls using the TV's speaker and remote control. Gimmicky perhaps, but it showed Zenith was still pushing boundaries. By 1975, Zenith's revenues approached $978 million. That's the peak, the absolute high watermark. The Springfield factory was running 3 shifts. The Chicago plants were at capacity. Zenith was one of America's great industrial success stories, a company that had survived the Depression, thrived through World War II, invented the remote control, dominated color television, and maintained quality standards when everyone else was cutting corners. This is the peak, the Springfield factory humming 24 hours a day, Consumer Reports giving them top ratings year after year, 6,000 workers clocking in every morning to build televisions that would last 20 years. The quality was going in, the name was going on, everything was working. But beneath this success, something sinister was happening. While Zenith perfected hand-wired construction and premium manufacturing, competitors in Japan were perfecting something else entirely: how to build televisions faster, cheaper, and in far greater quantities than any American company could match. By 1976, the American television industry was in free fall. Japanese imports held 44% amidst the U.S. color television market. 44%. Nearly half of every television sold in America came from overseas. Sony, Matsushita, Toshiba, these weren't fringe players anymore. They were dominating, and American manufacturers were collapsing under the onslaught. RCA, which had invented color television and ruled the industry for decades, was hemorrhaging market share. Motorola was preparing to exit the TV business entirely. Magnavox, Philco, Admiral, all were being acquired by foreign companies or shutting down their television divisions. Zenith's market share was dropping. In 1960, they'd controlled more than 20% of the American market. By 1976, that number had fallen below 15% and was still declining. The premium pricing strategy that had worked for decades was suddenly a fatal weakness. Japanese televisions weren't just cheaper, they were often better. Circuit board automation and miniaturization had advanced dramatically. Japanese factories could produce sets in a fraction of the time it took American workers hand-wiring chassis. Labor costs in Japan were lower. Component costs were lower. And the Japanese manufacturers were selling televisions in America below what it cost U.S. companies to build them. Zenith believed this was illegal dumping, selling products below cost to destroy competitors and capture market share. In 1974, Zenith and other American manufacturers filed lawsuits against Japanese television makers, accusing them of systematic predatory pricing and antitrust violations. The litigation would drag on for years, cost millions of dollars, and consume executive attention that should have been focused on adapting to the new reality. In 1986, the Supreme Court would rule against Zenith on the main claims. The legal battle accomplished nothing except draining resources. Meanwhile, the casualties mounted. By the early 1980s, RCA had sold its consumer electronics division to Thomson of France. Motorola exited televisions completely. GE sold to Thomson. Philips of the Netherlands absorbed Magnavox. Sylvania became a brand name owned by foreigners. Admiral was sold to Rockwell, then essentially liquidated. One by one, America's television manufacturers surrendered or collapsed. By 1987, Zenith stood alone, the last American-owned company still making televisions. They should have seen this coming. RCA saw it and sold out while the business still had value. Motorola saw it and pivoted to more profitable markets, but Zenith believed quality would save them. They believed American consumers would pay premium prices for hand-wired reliability. They believed the slogan painted on factory walls, "The quality goes in before the name goes on," was a competitive advantage rather than an epitaph. It wasn't enough. The market doesn't care about your quality standards when your competitor sells a television for $300 and yours costs $500. Consumers don't pay 40% more. For hand wiring they can't see. They buy what fits their budget, and Japanese televisions fit better. In 1971, facing cost pressures, Zenith began moving some manufacturing operations to Matamoros, Mexico, and Taiwan. More followed to other Mexican cities. The strategy was to keep high-value manufacturing and final assembly in America while offshoring labor-intensive work. But the problem wasn't just labor costs. Japanese companies had fundamental advantages in automation, supply chain efficiency, and production scale that couldn't be solved by moving assembly to Mexico. Price cutting devastated Zenith's revenues. In the late 1980s, the company calculated it had lost $500 million in revenue due to Japanese undercutting. $500 million. That's not market shift. That's an industrial extinction event. And starting in 1989, Zenith posted 5 consecutive years of losses. $52 million in 1991. $106 million in 1992. The company was bleeding, and no amount of quality obsession could stop it. By 1987, every other American television manufacturer had been eliminated or absorbed. Zenith remained. They wore it like a badge of honor. The last American television manufacturer. Press releases emphasized their resilience. Marketing campaigns highlighted American manufacturing. Workers in Springfield took pride in being part of the last stand, but being last didn't mean they were winning. It meant everyone else had been smart enough to quit while they still had value to sell. Zenith had outlasted the competition, but the prize for lasting longest was inheriting a dying market where foreign competitors held all the advantages. They were the last company standing in an industry that no longer had room for American manufacturers. The machinery of destruction was humming along smoothly, and the executives operating it thought stubbornness was the same as strategy. Springfield, Missouri, 1990. For the workers at the Zenith plant on East Sashech, Kearney Street, life was still good. The factory employed 1,500 people, down from its peak of 6,000, but still substantial, still enough to matter. Gail Garton spent most of her 10 years with Zenith on the final assembly line, building wooden cabinets for larger television sets. Her husband worked there too. So did friends from high school, neighbors from down the street, people she'd known her entire life. Walk into the plant cafeteria during lunch break, and you'd see 3 generations of some families. Grandfathers who'd started in the late 1960s, their sons who joined in the 1980s, granddaughters fresh out of vocational school. For these families, working at Zenith wasn't just employment. It was identity. The paychecks were solid middle-class wages, enough to buy a house, raise kids, take a vacation every summer. The benefits were real. Health insurance, pension plans, job security, or what felt like security. In Southwest Missouri, where options were limited and good, manufacturing jobs were precious. Zenith represented stability. The workers believed in the product. They'd grown up with the slogan painted in 6-foot letters on the factory wall. The quality goes in before the name goes on. They knew they were building televisions that lasted. Their own parents still had Zenith sets from the 1960s in working condition. When friends asked about buying a TV, Zenith workers recommended their own product without hesitation. The quality was real. The craftsmanship mattered. And surely eventually, consumers would recognize that and pay for it. Management reinforced this belief. Memos circulated about Zenith's superior engineering. Company newsletters celebrated quality awards from Consumer Reports. Executives visited the plant and talked about weathering the storm, about competing on reliability rather than price, about the value of American manufacturing. The message was clear: keep building excellent televisions, and the market would reward Zenith's commitment to quality. But the numbers told a different story. In Springfield, workers were assembling fewer and fewer units each month. Overtime disappeared. Some shifts were shortened. The plant that once ran 24 hours a day now had idle periods. Third shift got cut back, then second shift. Management explained it as temporary. Market adjustments, seasonal fluctuations, nothing to worry about. The workers wanted to believe it. In the executive offices, 400 miles north in Glenview, Illinois, a very different conversation was happening. Zenith was losing money every quarter. Japanese and Korean competitors were selling televisions for prices Zenith couldn't match, even if they eliminated all profit. The lawsuits against Japanese dumping had failed. The quality premium strategy wasn't working. Consumers bought the cheaper TV, and the company was running out of options. The Springfield workers didn't know they were living in the final chapter. They clocked in every morning, ran quality control tests, assembled cabinets, installed components, and believed the factory would keep running. Some had worked there for 20 years. For them, Zenith wasn't a corporation making strategic decisions in distant boardrooms. It was the place where they'd spent their entire adult lives, where they'd raised families, where they'd built something that mattered. They believed in quality. They believed in Zenith. They believed the factory would survive because it had to survive. Too many people depended on it. The alternative was unthinkable. 1,500 jobs disappearing from a city of 120,000 people would be catastrophic. Surely management wouldn't do that. Surely the company would find a way. The workers clocked in every morning, assembled televisions that met every quality standard, and went home believing they were building something that would last. But in the executive offices in Glenview, Illinois, a different conversation was happening. And that conversation had nothing to do with quality. In 1988, with Zenith posting losses and facing Japanese dominance, they made a choice that would define their final decade. The U.S. government was terrified. Japanese manufacturers had conquered color television. If they also dominated the next generation, high-definition television, American companies would be permanently locked out of the most important consumer electronics market. The Federal Communications Commission urged domestic manufacturers to develop HDTV standards quickly before Japan set the global framework. 3 company partnerships formed, each racing to create competing technologies. Zenith partnered with AT&T Microelectronics. Their bet was on digital transmission, a radical departure from the analog systems that had defined television since its invention. The other partnerships pursued their own approaches. For 5 years, these groups competed intensely, spending millions on research and development, each trying to convince the FCC that their standard should become America's HDTV future. Then, in 1993, the government changed the game. Instead of picking one winner, the FCC formed the Digital HDTV Grand Alliance. 7 companies forced to cooperate, combining the best elements from competing systems. AT&T, General Instrument, MIT, Philips, Thomson, Zenith, and the Sarnoff Corporation worked together to create a unified standard. The goal was to merge 4 previously competitive digital solutions into one best-of-breed approach. Zenith's engineers developed the VSB, Vestigial Sideband, digital transmission system. It was technically brilliant, solving complex problems about how to broadcast high-definition signals efficiently. In January 1994, after comparative laboratory testing, the Grand Alliance selected Zenith's VSB as the transmission subsystem for the American HDTV standard. This was a genuine engineering triumph. On December 24, 1996, Christmas Eve, the FCC officially adopted Zenith's technology as the centerpiece of the ATSC digital television broadcast standard. Zenith had won. Their transmission system would be embedded in every digital television sold in America. In 1997, Zenith and other Grand Alliance members received a Technical Emmy Award for pioneering developments behind the ATSC standard. Industry publications praised Zenith's innovation. Engineers celebrated. The quality goes in before the name goes on. They'd proved it again. But here's what nobody wanted to say out loud. The victory was hollow. Zenith had invested $15 million developing HDTV technology. The royalty arrangement meant they'd receive perhaps $10 to $20 per television set sold. But HDTV wasn't going to be mass market for years, maybe a decade. The early 2000s was the optimistic timeline for when HDTV sales would approach regular television volumes. Until then, Zenith would see almost no return on their investment. They'd won a technology battle that wouldn't generate meaningful revenue until well into the 21st century. Meanwhile, the company was hemorrhaging cash. They needed money immediately, not royalties a decade away. So in October 1989, Zenith made a catastrophic decision. They sold Zenith Data Systems to Group Bull for $635 million. $635 million. Let that number sink in. Zenith Data Systems was the computer subsidiary they'd created in 1980 after acquiring Heath Company. ZDS was profitable. By the late 1980s, its profits were literally sustaining the parent company. The television division was losing money every quarter. The computer division was making money. Zenith sold the profitable business to fund research on the dying one. This wasn't strategic repositioning. This was desperation. Executives knew the television business was failing, but convinced themselves HDTV would be the salvation. All they had to do was survive long enough for the technology to mature and the royalties to flow. So they sold the one division, generating positive cash flow, and bet everything on a technology that wouldn't pay off for a decade. The losses mounted. Starting in 1989, Zenith posted 5 straight years of heavy losses. $52 million in 1991, $106 million in 1992. The smallest loss was $52 million. The largest was $106 million. While competitors focused on making money selling televisions today, Zenith was burning through cash developing televisions for tomorrow. They should have asked a simple question. How long can we bleed money waiting for HDTV to become profitable? The answer was obvious to anyone willing to see it. Not long enough. But nobody asked. Or if they did, nobody wanted to hear the answer. The engineers were focused on winning the technology competition. The executives were focused on survival, and both groups convinced themselves that winning the HDTV standard would somehow reverse decades of market share losses and cost disadvantages. In 1989, Zenith Data Systems was making money. The TV division was hemorrhaging millions. They sold the profitable business to fund the dying one. Think about that logic. Your house is on fire, so you sell the fire extinguisher to buy more matches. They won the technology battle. The FCC adopted their standard on Christmas Eve, 1996. They got their Emmy in 1997. Industry publications praised their innovation. Engineers put the awards on their shelves. And it meant absolutely nothing. By the time HDTV became profitable in the early 2000s, Zenith wouldn't exist as an American company. They'd be wholly owned by a Korean conglomerate, the brand reduced to a label stamped on budget televisions built in Mexico. The company that pioneered wireless remote controls, that survived the Great Depression, that outlasted every other American television manufacturer. They bet everything on being right about the future. And they were right. The technology they developed became the American standard. But being right doesn't matter if you don't. Survive long enough to collect. October 29th, 1991. The announcement came without warning. Zenith Electronics Corporation, the last American-owned television manufacturer, was moving final assembly operations from Springfield, Missouri, to Reynosa, Mexico, and other offshore locations. Approximately 1,200 jobs would be eliminated. The decision would take effect following the expiration of the union contract with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers in March 1992. 300 to 500 jobs might be preserved in Springfield for distribution, support, and plastic component production. The rest, gone. Jerry K. Perlman, Zenith's chairman, issued a written statement explaining the move was needed to reduce costs and improve profitability. Price cutting had cost Zenith $500 million in lost revenue over the previous 5 years. The company could no longer compete paying American wages when competitors assembled televisions in Mexico for a fraction of the cost. The announcement was framed as a business necessity, an unfortunate but unavoidable response to market realities. For the 1,500 workers in Springfield, it was a betrayal. Some had worked at Zenith for 20 years. Gail Garton, who'd spent a decade on the final assembly line building wooden cabinets, was called into the office on November 30th, 1990, a year before the main announcement, and told her job was being eliminated in an earlier round of cuts. She immediately enrolled in a 2-year secretarial program at Missouri State University, using her Pell Grant and scholarship money to retrain for a completely different career. She was one of the lucky ones who saw it coming early and had time to prepare. Most workers weren't that fortunate. The announcement hit like a bomb. Families who'd built their entire lives around Zenith watched their futures evaporate. Homes mortgaged based on steady Zenith paychecks suddenly looked unaffordable. College funds built on Zenith's stability disappeared. The largest layoff in Springfield's history was about to destroy the city's economic foundation. But this wasn't sudden. Zenith's relationship with Korean manufacturer LG, then called Lucky Gold Star, dated back to the 1970s. LG had made radios for Zenith. LG bought picture tubes and components from Zenith. Zenith bought LG, made VCRs and combination T VCR sets. The relationship deepened as Zenith's financial situation deteriorated. In 1990, facing mounting losses and the threat of hostile takeover, Zenith sold a 5% stake to Lucky Gold Star for $15 million. The deal was framed as a technology sharing agreement, a partnership between equals. LG gained access to Zenith's HDTV research and flat-screen technology. Zenith got desperately needed capital and a partner with low-cost manufacturing capabilities. It looked like a rescue. It wasn't a rescue. It was the beginning of an acquisition. By July 1995, LG increased its stake to 55%, paying $351 million for controlling interest. $351 million for a company that had been worth nearly $1 billion at its peak. Read that again. In 1975, Zenith's revenues approached $978 million, and the company was valued accordingly. 20 years later, a Korean conglomerate bought majority control for $351 million. The last American television manufacturer sold itself for pennies on the dollar. The Springfield layoffs began in waves through 1992. Workers watched friends disappear one shift at a time. Some found jobs at other local manufacturers. Some retrained through Job Council of the Ozarks, which received an 18-month Department of Labor grant specifically to help displaced Zenith workers. Some simply left Springfield, following rumors of work in other cities, abandoning the only home they'd ever known. By 1994, the factory that once employed 6,000 workers at peak capacity had maybe a few hundred left, mostly in distribution and support roles. The assembly line sat silent. The injection molding equipment was idle. The spray painting facilities were shut down. The building remained, but the purpose was gone. In Springfield, workers were told quality would save them. Management kept repeating the slogan, "The quality goes in before the name goes on," as if saying it enough times would make it true. In Seoul, LG executives were calculating how much cheaper Mexican labor would be, how much they could save by moving operations to Reynosa, how to extract maximum value from Zenith's HDTV patents and brand name while abandoning American manufacturing entirely. In 1996, Zenith announced it was laying off 25% of its U.S. workforce, another brutal round of cuts across remaining American operations. In 1998, the company closed its last U.S. manufacturing facility, the Melrose Park picture tube plant outside Chicago. After that, nothing. No American factories, no American assembly. The televisions still bore the Zenith name, but they were designed in Illinois, manufactured in Mexico, and increasingly controlled by Korean executives. The Springfield factory didn't close all at once. It died slowly, agonizingly, over 6 years. Workers watched their colleagues disappear, watched the shifts shrink, watched the building empty, section by section. The quality still went in. The remaining workers took pride in maintaining standards to the very end. But the name wasn't going on anymore. Not in America. The televisions were being built in Reynosa now, where workers earned in a day what Springfield workers had earned in an hour. LG's investment wasn't a rescue. It was an acquisition stretched over 5 years, dismantling American operations piece by piece while securing access to Zenith's HDTV technology and brand recognition. And Zenith's final act was still to come. By 1998, Zenith was a corpse still walking. The company posted a loss of $275.5 million that year. $275.5 million. On sales of just $984.8 million. Think about those numbers for a second. Zenith was losing more than a quarter of its revenue. Every $4 that came in, $1 disappeared into the void. This wasn't a struggling business. This was a death spiral. The television line was aging catastrophically. The System 3 chassis, Zenith's last major analog television update, had launched in 1978, 20 years earlier. Since then, competitors had released multiple generations of new technology, while Zenith limped along with incremental improvements to a 2-decade-old platform. The market had moved to sleeker designs, better features, lower prices. Zenith's televisions looked outdated because they were outdated. HDTV was still years away from mass adoption. In September 1999, only 70 digital TV stations were broadcasting in the entire country. Consumers weren't buying HDTV sets because there was almost nothing to watch. Zenith's technological triumph, the transmission standard adopted by the FCC, the Emmy-winning innovation, remained commercially irrelevant. The company had bet everything on a technology that wouldn't generate meaningful revenue until well into the 2000s. Then came DivX, Zenith's final disastrous foray into new technology. DivX was a pay-per-view DVD system. You bought specially encrypted discs cheaply, then paid each time you watched them. The player connected to a phone line to authorize viewing and charge fees. It was digital rights management before DRM became ubiquitous, and consumers hated it. Why pay repeatedly to watch a movie you'd already purchased? The format flopped spectacularly. Zenith lost millions on the failed venture. In August 1999, with no end to the losses in sight, Zenith filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The filing was prepackaged, negotiated in advance with creditors and with LG's support. Everyone knew what would happen. LG, as Zenith's largest creditor, would convert approximately $200 million of debt owed by Zenith into common stock. $200 million. That's what LG paid to own 100% of what had once been America's greatest electronics company. The existing shareholders, people who'd invested in Zenith believing in American manufacturing, in quality engineering, in the company's ability to survive, got nothing. The bankruptcy court filing stated clearly that all outstanding common shares would be canceled. Shareholders received no distributions for their stock. The investments were rendered worthless. Decades of value accumulation disappeared in the legal paperwork. Zenith emerged from bankruptcy in November 1999 as a wholly owned subsidiary of LG Electronics. The restructuring transformed the company entirely. Zenith was no longer a manufacturer. It became a designer and marketer. All production was outsourced. The brand name survived, but the company behind it was gone. Zenith Electronics Corporation, the entity that had built radios on a kitchen table, survived the Depression, invented the remote control, developed HDTV, no longer existed in any meaningful sense. In the summer of 2000, LG sold off the most valuable asset remaining, Zenith's Network Systems division, which produced set-top boxes for cable and satellite television. This division was actually profitable. Motorola bought it and absorbed it into Motorola broadband communications sector. The last piece of Zenith that made money was stripped away and sold to maintain what remained. 81 years from kitchen table to bankruptcy court. 51 years from first television to filing Chapter 11. 12 years from last American TV manufacturer to Korean subsidiary. The compression is brutal. The bankruptcy paperwork called it a reorganization. Legal documents described a restructuring plan designed to maximize value for stakeholders. But everyone knew what it really was: an execution. The company that had pioneered subscription television, that had invented the wireless remote control, that had developed the HDTV standard adopted by the entire United States. It didn't exist anymore. Only the name remained, owned by a Korean conglomerate, stamped on budget televisions assembled in Mexico and sold at Walmart. The quality had gone in for 81 years, but the name was going on products Zenith would never build. Today, the building still stands at 2500 East Kearny Street in Springfield, Missouri. The 2 million square feet that once housed assembly lines, injection molding equipment, spray painting facilities, and quality control stations now serve a different purpose. Bass Pro Shops bought the property and converted it into Sportsman's Warehouse, the outdoor retailer's sprawling corporate headquarters and distribution center. Walk through those halls today, and you'll see fishing equipment where television chassis were once assembled. Camouflage jackets hang where circuit boards were installed. The factory that was supposed to secure America's place in television manufacturing now sells fishing rods and hunting gear. The transformation is almost poetic. The building survived. The jobs didn't. The workers scattered across Springfield and beyond. Some retrained through programs at Ozarks Technical Community College, learning new skills for different industries. The Job Council of the Ozarks, later the Missouri Career Center, helped displaced Zenith employees find work, though few found positions that paid as well or offered the same stability. Union Representative Tom Peen spent 8 years helping dislocated workers after his own Zenith job disappeared. He understood what they'd lost because he'd lost it too. Gail Garton, who'd spent a decade building television cabinets, retrained as a secretary, and eventually became a teacher. She was lucky. She saw the closure coming and prepared. Many workers weren't that fortunate. For families that had worked at Zenith for multiple generations, the plant's closing didn't just eliminate jobs, it erased identity. The impact on Springfield was severe enough that the city created Partnership Industrial Center in 1992, a master-planned industrial park designed to attract new manufacturers and replace the jobs Zenith had destroyed. The loss taught the community a brutal lesson about dependence on a single employer. The largest layoff in Springfield's history, 1,500 workers gone, forced the city to diversify its economic base or face permanent decline. Meanwhile, the Zenith brand limps along as a ghost. LG Electronics still licenses the name, stamping it on budget televisions sold at Walmart and other discount retailers. The lightning bolt logo appears on products that have nothing to do with the company that invented the wireless remote control. These televisions are cheap, functional, unremarkable. They're designed in Korea, manufactured in China or Mexico, and sold to consumers who have no idea what Zenith once represented. The name survives, the meaning is dead. In 2018, the Zenith headquarters building in Glenview, Illinois, The nerve center from which the company had been managed for decades was demolished. Aeon had occupied it for years after Zenith's collapse. Then, Abt Electronics, an appliance and electronics retailer, needed space to expand. The building came down to make room. The physical structure that had housed the executives who made the decisions that destroyed Zenith no longer exists. It's parking lot now, and television manufacturing in America, gone completely. Not a single facility remains. Every television sold in the United States today comes from overseas: China, Korea, Mexico, Vietnam. The technology that defined American consumer electronics for 50 years is now produced entirely outside American borders. When Zenith closed its last factory in 1998, American television manufacturing didn't transition to new ownership or evolve into something else. It just ended. The building stands. Bass Pro Shops employs people there, sells outdoor equipment, contributes to Springfield's economy. But those jobs aren't Zenith jobs. They don't pay Zenith wages. They don't offer Zenith benefits or Zenith stability. The workers who built televisions for 20 years couldn't simply transfer to selling fishing poles. The skills weren't transferable. The careers were over. The factory that opened with so much promise in 1967, $10 million invested. A symbol of American industrial might. A source of 6,000 middle-class jobs, survived as a building but died as a purpose. The workers moved on because they had to. Some rebuilt careers. Some retired early. Some never recovered from the loss. And America stopped making televisions. Not gradually, not with careful planning or government support or retraining programs that actually worked. Just stopped. The last factory closed. And that was it. An entire industry disappeared, taking with it the jobs, the expertise, the manufacturing capacity, and any pretense that quality or innovation or being right about technology mattered more than being cheap. Here's what Zenith's collapse teaches us. Lesson 1. Technology wins don't guarantee business wins. Zenith developed the digital transmission system that became the foundation of American HDTV broadcasting. The FCC adopted their standard on December 24, 1996. They won a technical Emmy in 1997. Industry publications praised their innovation. Engineers celebrated the technical triumph, and the company filed for bankruptcy 3 years later. Being right about the future doesn't help if you can't survive to see it. Zenith invested $15 million developing HDTV technology that would generate royalties of $10 to $20 per television set, but only after mass adoption, which wouldn't happen until the early 2000s. They bet on a payoff that would come a decade too late. The market doesn't wait for your technology timeline. It rewards whoever can profit today, not whoever will be vindicated tomorrow. Lesson 2. Quality can't compete with price alone. The quality goes in. Before the name goes on, wasn't enough. Zenith believed their slogan was a competitive advantage. It was an anchor. Hand-wired construction cost more than circuit boards. Premium materials cost more than cheaper alternatives. American labor cost more than Mexican or Asian labor. Zenith televisions were objectively better built than many competitors' sets. Consumer Reports confirmed it for years. But consumers chose the $300 Japanese television over the $500 Zenith. Quality reputation doesn't pay bills when competitors undercut prices by 40%. The market proved it would rather replace a cheap TV every 5 years than pay double for one that lasts 20. Zenith kept building televisions for customers who no longer existed in sufficient numbers to sustain the business. Lesson 3. You can't fund a dying business by selling your winners. In October 1989, Zenith sold Zenith Data Systems to Group Bull for $635 million. ZDS was profitable. The computer division's profits were sustaining the parent company through the television division's mounting losses. Zenith took the one part of the business that made money and sold it to fund HDTV research for the part that was bleeding cash. This wasn't strategic repositioning. This was desperation, masquerading as vision. When your house is on fire, selling the fire extinguisher to buy gasoline doesn't solve the problem. It accelerates the disaster. The $635 million bought time, but not survival. Within a decade, Zenith was bankrupt and absorbed by LG. The profitable division they sold could have been the foundation for transformation into a different kind of electronics company. Instead, they sacrificed it on the altar of a television business that was already doomed. Lesson 4. Being last isn't the same as winning. Zenith wore last American television manufacturer as a badge of honor. Management emphasized it in press, releases. Workers took pride in it. The media celebrated it. But being last just meant everyone else had been smart enough to quit when they could still salvage value. RCA sold to Thomson while the brand still had worth. Motorola exited televisions and focused on more profitable markets. GE, Philips, Westinghouse, they all recognized the battle was unwinnable and repositioned accordingly. Zenith stayed in the fight until there was nothing left to save. They outlasted their competitors and inherited a market where foreign manufacturers held every structural advantage: lower labor costs, better automation, more efficient supply chains, massive production scale. The prize for being last was getting to lose everything while everyone else had already moved on. Think about that. Zenith developed the technology that powers digital television today. Every HDTV broadcast in America uses their transmission system. They were completely, objectively right about the future of television. And they went bankrupt anyway, because being right in 1996 didn't help when they needed revenue in 1989. The FCC adopted their standard 3 years before the company collapsed. The Emmy came 2 years before bankruptcy. The vindication was useless. The market doesn't care about your legacy. It doesn't care that you invented the remote control, or survived the Great Depression, or developed HDTV. It only cares about what you're selling right now, at what price, compared to what your competitors are offering. Nostalgia is not a business strategy. Quality is not a business strategy when quality costs 40% more than good enough. Zenith's story isn't just about televisions. It's about what happens when empires refuse to adapt, when quality becomes an excuse for high prices, when companies bet everything on technologies that won't pay off for decades. The last American television manufacturer didn't fall because of one mistake. It fell because of a dozen mistakes, compounding, accelerating, until collapse was inevitable. They should have diversified earlier. They should have recognized that being right about technology means nothing if you're dead before it matters. They should have understood that outlasting competitors in a dying market isn't victory. It's just a slower death. The factory in Springfield still stands, repurposed, serving a different economy. The workers scattered, rebuilt what they could, carried on. The brand name survives on cheap televisions assembled overseas. But the company, the actual entity that built empires on innovation and quality, is gone. 81 years from kitchen table to bankruptcy. 51 years from first television to final collapse. And American television manufacturing ended, not with a plan or a transition, but with the last factory going silent, and everyone pretending it was inevitable. It wasn't inevitable. It was predictable. And every lesson was written in decisions Zenith made. Ignored warnings, Zenith dismissed, and obvious outcomes Zenith refused to see. Every company that thinks it's too big to fail should study Zenith. The last American television manufacturer believed quality would save them. It didn't. They believed winning the technology battle would secure their future. It didn't. They believed being last standing meant they were winning. It meant everyone else had quit while they still could. What other American industries do you see making the same mistakes? Betting on technology that's years away from profitability, selling their successful divisions to fund dying businesses, wearing last standing as a badge when it's actually a warning sign. What companies are confusing stubbornness with strategy, quality reputation with competitive advantage, technological correctness with business survival? Let me know in the comments below. If you want more stories of American industrial rise and fall, hit subscribe. Thanks for watching.